Here I am back in studio with Kal, my good friend. And last episode, we were actually talking about a book, and it kept Kal awake all night because he couldn't remember what the name of the book was. Well, if the guy didn't run out and go and buy the book, no, he had the book, didn't you, Kal?
I actually had the book. Not only did I have the book, I have it signed by the author, whose daughter I'm friends with. So maybe I will send this episode to them to listen to it. But the name of the book is Free Behind Bars, The True Story of a Man Imprisoned in Cuba for His Faith in Christ. And this is what the book looks like. Very much looking forward to reading it, just to get a bit more in depth, a recount of, and also the story of, and also the price that people with conviction are willing to pay for their morality. I think, yes, there's so many different sides to it. There's the side of the human suffering, but then I think the more important story, the more interesting story for me is the convictions that people are willing to stake their lives on, which is, right. Good to see you again, my friend.
Yeah, no, likewise. So you didn't read the book yet? Is that what you're saying?
I did not read the book. I've heard his story before from his daughter, and I know a little bit about what I'm going to read. But as I'm looking at it, there's a lot of references to scripture, obviously. And each chapter starts with another verse from the New Testament. So it's going to be interesting to see him weaving his experience of imprisonment and preaching and being freed, and then his life here in the United States. And I think that's a lot of what the conversation we had last time, which is the contrast of what's happening in our country. We think that it's just another sunny day, but there's a lot of sinisterness happening in this country of people that are
sinisterness. Yeah, with the root on the sinner.
Right. By the way, did you listen to this week's episodes of Jordan Peterson's podcasts?
No. Why is it juicy?
It's juicy. I mean, it's more on the topic of cancel culture, and it's more on the topic of woke supremacy, and more on the topic of, but he gets in not so much in the excuse me, not so much on the propaganda of it, but more like dissecting it. Like, what are some of the belief systems, and good ones. I highly recommend it. What have you been up to the last couple of days?
What I wanted to bring up that book just one more time, because you had mentioned that it has a bunch of scripture in it, right?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to take a point to acknowledge that my ideal way of reading a book like that would be to pause and look up the scripture. Like, would you do the same thing? Or you might intuitively know some of the references. Is that the case?
Some of them I would, if they are from the Old Testament. If they were in the New Testament, maybe. I've read the New Testament a few times. I had actually a time in Israel while living in Jerusalem where I was studying the New Testament.
Oh.
And I went as far as exploring where my eyesight was. So I was guarding my eyesight, not only my speech, but like I would go on the streets and I would pay attention to, I just noticed sexy women, but then will not indulge. Like, I had a very interesting time in my early 20s in Israel, playing around with temptation and playing around with restraining my temptation toward the world. It was very interesting. It was right at the same time that I was studying the New Testament. It was, yeah.
Let's hover there a little bit about the woman concept. So the idea was that Kal would be walking down the street. Look at you, Kal. You'd be commanding attention. They're probably looking at you. But you're saying what you do is that you want to divert that sort of mental focus into something that's it's fine with meeting a girl and talking to somebody, but it's not the superficial. It's like, don't allow my mind to drift into a story of the skin, so to speak. Is that kind of the idea?
I don't know. Do we want What is Suffering episode to be a conversation about my puritanical tendencies? I mean, why did I do it at the time? I have done different extreme practices through my life. I mean, today I was up at 4 a.m. The majority of the world is still asleep at 4 a.m. I think my experience of religiosity and my experience of religion, spirituality, has always been, I've always lived in this very extreme plural, that's not the word that I'm looking for. Like if you, any time in my life, if you kind of like, okay, here's the story of my life, put your finger on it and tell me what was happening then, you would usually see two extremes. You'll see a monastic life, and then you'll see my integration into culture and society and pleasures. And I think that kind of goes back to how I was raised. My father was always up at 5 a.m. on the dot. You'll hear his alarm go off. He would go off to synagogue. So I grew up with a very disciplined, almost like a monasticness of religious culture and how that was integrated into our lives. And as I kind of weaved off into the world of exploration for many years in rebellion, I don't know, these practices, I always come back to them, especially through my recovery and especially through my sobriety. I've made discipline a very integrated part of my life. So
I'm going to give you a three-part sort of question. The first one, we'll just have you ponder for a minute. It's rhetorical. I don't want you to answer it yet. But when I come up for air, let me know whether you want to talk more about your sobriety, more about your recovery. So hold on your answer for that. The second aspect, I wanted to tie the idea of temptation into this concept of suffering, because we didn't really see a connection there, right?
Right.
But I think it's actually something that is reoccurring in our biology. To find is this Dionysian, the temptations, the reward now versus the delayed gratification. These types of things are constant if we know thyself, right? This famous quip from Socrates. So it's something that I just acknowledge and I'm aware of, right? So taking that objective position and saying, okay, I'm aware of this now. What and how I choose to orient myself in the world now, that's, to use more of a religious concept, that's the grace from which I either walk in or avoid, right, sort of thing.
Well, let's dive in. Would you say the other side of suffering is pleasure? I don't know. There is a pleasure in the midst of suffering. I think again, back to our Saint Jordan.
Yeah, I call him JP. I mean,
JP.
JC. I call him JC. I mean, JP.
Right. I would say, we talked about that in the first episode, these many accounts of individuals that went through extreme suffering. Would you say, well, and that's the question that we asked ourselves in the first episode, which is like, would you say that if somebody is suffering, but the suffering has deep meaning, that there's less suffering, or there's still the suffering there, but they're willing to tolerate the suffering. They're willing to celebrate the suffering. They're willing to go through the suffering because the context that suffering is happening into. But I think they're not mutually exclusive. I think the other side of going through suffering is pleasure. So yesterday when I lay down in my meditation, in the morning I do around an hour meditation, and at night it varies, sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes an hour. And I've been doing these guided Joe Dispenza's meditation. And I lay down. I do it laying down. I don't do it sitting because I have a bad lower back, and it allows me to kind of drop into this very trippy state really quickly. But I had all these discomforts that were coming up, and the discomfort led to anxiety. And I had this like hard breathing, tingling sensations in a painful way. And I had a point where I was like, dear body, dear existence, I am not going to tolerate you distracting me from dropping into being present. And I'm not, because usually my mind wants to get really busy and it wants to start figuring out how am I going to survive because I feel like I'm dying. I've dealt with anxiety for many years, and happy to always talk about it. It's been a source of suffering that I use as a focal point to come back into prayer, or to come back into breath, or come back into practices. And I've not always been perfect at it, but yesterday was one of those examples where I laid down a meditation. I lay down to do my practice, and I was really uncomfortable. I was sweating, and at some point shaking, and I could give into it. And at that particular point, I said, I'm going to go to get so ecstatically intimate with what I'm experiencing that I don't care about the ramifications. And for me, I live in extremes. So as I'm sitting there, I was like, if even that means collapsing my body, I'm not going to give in to where it wants to take me, to get distracted. And I'm going to stay uncomfortable. And at 30 minutes into it, when my meditation was done, I was like, I'm not done. I'm not done, because my body is still torturing me. So I went into another hour guided meditation. And by the end of it, I was blissed out of my mind. Not only was there no pain there, I got to the point of the mind being quiet, my body being at peace, ready to kind of give myself into sleep. That was a really cool experience. So I was, not obviously, but 4 o'clock in the morning when my clock went off, I was in a really restful, exciting state to wake up, which is not always the case. But again, back to suffering, there is something to be said about gracefully, or I don't know about gracefully, but like willingly, because sometimes it could be kicking and screaming. So there's not a lot of grace to that. But willingly going into the pain.
Yeah.
And then obviously I keep saying it's obvious. Maybe it's not obvious to everyone, but it becomes obvious in the experience that when I'm exercising surrender, exercising trust, and I have these thoughts that look like this. If my cells in my heart is just about 1 million times more intelligent than my cognitive mind, my identity of self, if my very body has more intelligence to how it operates and how it sustains itself, maybe I can let go of the attachment of like, oh my God, the world is falling apart. And maybe I can, like, willingly or unwillingly, but place myself in the surrender of the creative intelligence. And it doesn't have to be some supernovae star living out in the galaxies. It could be as simple as I can probably spend an entire lifetime or a few lifetimes studying this body that I live in. So to be able to look at even in my hands and go, the complexity of what I'm looking at is so insanely mind-blowing. Maybe the scary narratives going through my mind, I can surrender it to the creative intelligence of my own existence, my own body, my own being.
Yeah.
So I have conversations like that when I go into this freak out mode. It's like, okay, just chill. It's like obviously there's the chemical stuff happening, neurologically firing away. But if I just try to surrender into even just the pathways of my neurological system, you're like, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah. I know conversations, and quite honestly, are a tennis match sometimes, right? Because, there's a decay function as your speech starts to go on, and I'm trying to find what the next question is that I'm going to ask you. However, I think there's a little bit of a bandwidth that we sacrifice in terms of hearing what you're actually saying. And what I found very fascinating about what you were just explaining about, well, there's several factors, there's several aspects of what you just explained about surrendering to, to the experience of your body, relinquishing power, or I guess like removing power from your cognitive processes, taking a time out, so to speak. And so it was odd. I was just noticing that as I was sitting there listening to you, there was no searching for me to think what the next question was, because it was actually very, very fascinating, right? That's very interesting. how you're able to, I guess, unpack that, break it down. It just, I'm kind of glued to that. It's really fascinating, right?
Yeah,
No
I
question. No
think
question.
a lot of this just comes circling back when you have these individuals in the world that can't seem to make their own bed. We'll use that literally or figuratively, but they want to solve climate change. Like, you can't even explain to me how your hair on your head grows. How about you study that for a little bit? So you have some, not only context, so you have some insight into the functionality that you embody. And then maybe you go like have an opinion about everyone in your neighborhood and everyone in your city and everyone in your continent and everyone on your planet and everyone on planet Earth that should obey to your preconceived notions of an opinion that you adopted by somebody who gave it to you that also doesn't know how to make their own bed. You're like
Yeah, I know the
no.
references, Cal. I know the references, Cal, because there's we are singling out kind of like, the wokeness perversion and that phenomenon and so on and so forth. But let's give our potential interlocutor a platform, so to speak, and say that we had a third representative person here in this room. They completely make their bed. We all make our beds. We've all justified our own existence. We're all healthily well adapted. Cal on the other one side of the extreme manages an extreme, right? And in fact, this whole podcast could be an example of that. I remember when I pitched the idea to you, you're like, okay, I don't have that extreme. I've got what I do on a daily day, right? You're involved in finances and all sorts of stuff. I don't even know the extent, but you're like, yeah, I haven't really done that publicly yet. So yeah, let's put a finger on where Cal is on 2021. And yeah, I had the extreme with the show with Dan, and I was also, so you kind of, do you see it that way?
You have to unpack that more.
I threw two concepts at you because I was saying, first of all, there was the idea, does this show represent the dichotomy between Cal's two worlds, like the professional world and
I see.
Right? And then the other aspect is, let's pretend that there's the representation of the climate guy. He's not either you or me. But all of the people in this room, me, you, and this fictional person, we all make our beds. We all do what we have to do. We all have our responsibilities, and we're, more or less ideal citizens. I mean, holding our weight. So what's the approach? What does the climate change guy do? Right. So there's those two kind of comments, the climate change piece, and then the dichotomy between the show and your real life.
So let's speak to our fictional selves and to the third person for a second. The climate person, I would say, there's a lot of nobility, and I have to give it its proper respect. There's nobility in saying, I'm a citizen of the world. I care about this world. I want the next generation to live in a better world, not only survive, but thrive. So the premise of a lot of these social justice warriors or cancel culture fans, I don't think that's a term, and then let's put it on an extreme tilt on the environmental extremists. Let's put it in that category, because caring about the environment is a noble thing.
Yeah.
So this conversation can last for just a second, which is like, yes, it's a noble goal and it's also a noble undertaking, but at least from my recovery and my sobriety, I've learned that, one, you can't really offer somebody something you don't have. So yes, you might use a lot of really cool talking points, and there might be validity to what you're saying, but to be an individual that can actually affect the world, which is usually a very complicated matter, but to be an individual that wants to impact the world, starting with yourself as being a representation of these principles and being a perfect citizen, and then contribute to the world, one will have a lot more luck doing so and a lot more success doing so if your own house is in order. So that's certainly a concept that I live with. It's like, I sometimes get asked advice on certain things and I shy away from it because I go, I don't even feel like I've perfected that thing. How can I tell you how to do something? But I'll certainly feel very eager and excited to share my experience with doing something well if I have perfected it. So in a lot of these causes, I would venture to say, and this is again another tangent, I would venture to say that, and that goes back to some of our podcasts prior, our conversations prior, which is it's easy and it would make sense for somebody who is so much in pain and is suffering internally so much, rather than looking at their own stuff and fixing it and rectifying it and getting right with it and healing it and treating it, it's easier to put blame on the world and then take all that resentment that has been building year after year for not, you look maybe wrong really done to you, unjustified, or maybe just because life is suffering. The nature of life is suffering. So it's easy to put it out in the world. And if only the world could change, I would change internally. And I promise you from the bottom of my heart, and please prove me wrong, that it always works that way. You cannot change yourself by changing the world. It goes the other way around. So that's one tangent with regards to if there was this third person. Yes, of course, some of the statistics you're looking at might be correct, maybe not. I don't know what you're looking at. And yes, it could be a very noble goal. But here's the sinister part of these movements, that they start with virtue, but where it ends is catastrophe. So I've always, in my life, I would look at ideas and I go, okay, this idea, the way it sits in the context of where it sits is not so harmful. It's like the world won't be changed so drastically if I kind of live out of integrity in this particular domain of my life. What happens if I take it to an extreme? Where does it end? And I think that's a very good exercise to do. Like, where does it go? Because a lot of people will be like, well, we're not there. But over time and enough people and enough buy-in, where does it lead? And well, we only have the past as a reference point, and it's a damn good reference point, especially when you're looking at fact, and especially when you're looking at numbers, and when you're looking at actually history telling the story of our humanity. So I guess to finish that point would be like, yes, there could be virtue, like Black Lives Matter. Who in their right mind will say Black lives don't matter? Not a single human being, regardless of the color of your skin, especially if you're Black in this context, in this conversation, you should have every right to be a sovereign individual. So, but Black Lives Matter start with, I mean, you can't disagree with that concept. You'll be an evil person. You'll be a racist if you disagree. But where's the money actually going? What are they actually doing for Black America? What does the story actually tell of Black America? How are they doing post defunding police and before? Like, the fact that something isn't working in a system, you don't dismantle the system that is keeping more evil out, you perfect it. So again, we can look at gender studies, and then we can look at Black Lives Matter, and we can look at Antifa, and we can look at critical race theory, and there's enough people talking about it that are a million times more educated than you and I, at least me. I don't know how educated you are on those topics, but it doesn't matter. The point of this particular context is the fact that it sounds good doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah.
The fact that you heard it from people you like and approve of doesn't make it right. And test it. What evidence do you actually have that what you're saying is actually doing good rather than seemingly virtuous? And that's the toxic mimic that we've been talking about.
Yeah, powerful, because the movement on climate change is a big one, right? I mean, I want to say that, imagine we had a crystal ball, which we don't, right? But we had a crystal ball, and at some point in the future, we were on a trajectory of mass extinction. Under your model, how and who identifies that, and how do we correct if we do at all?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in that domain, but the people that I've listened to, like Jordan Peterson, who I trust, and he's not just somebody that I trust, the UN trusted him to invite him to be a part of certain studies. And he's an individual that can tell you firsthand what the process was actually, who wrote what under which departments and who overlooked what and who actually did the hard work around looking at statistics. And another person that I've been listening to recently is Dan Cranshaw. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Ex-veteran that was in Congress. And he has many episodes of having invited a bunch of different scientists on his show, on his podcast, to talk about climate change. I mean, again, this is not this is not meant to be used in any context of an educated conversation, but what I have taken away from is like, yes, we are affecting the world. And 2 points. One, if you looked at the 100 top issues plaguing civilization, climate change wouldn't even make the top 10% of it. A lot of other issues that we have more means to do so, better education and better data on, more money to actually solve it. The impact will be longer lasting. Climate change is not even on them. 2, yes, it is changing, but in insanely small increments that the impact on the world will be less than the money and the abuse we're doing to planet Earth in trying to go green. Meaning the amount of energy we're now extracting to build batteries for electric cars is worse than fossil fuel.
Yeah.
So the cost is completely delusional and irrational and conniving, and I don't know what other words to use. Like, not only are alarmists completely insane, but even the ones that are not alarmists and actually looking at the data, we're certainly not doing anything to make planet Earth a better place in the context of climate change. It's nothing more than another talking point, another way of extracting wealth from people and limiting rights to people, and get really busy being virtuous than actually impacting the world positively. It's like, in my opinion, you have no right to be talking about these issues until you've cleaned your own room, which would be your own city, your own country. It's like, it comes back to the same conversations we started having. It's like, hey, Women's March, how about you go to Iran? It's like, and the same would be like, oh, you really care about climate change? How about we look at what India and China are doing to the climate? That they literally have done almost nothing, and the pollution that they are contributing to the world and the damage it's going to do. It's like, regardless of what our country does, even if all of a sudden we did nothing to add, and I'm not even convinced that carbon dioxide is even a negative thing. There's way too much science out there saying that that's actually what's helping have the world be greener than it's ever been with regards to how many trees we've been planting, in the millions. So there are parts of our planet that are more green from trees that we've added over the last few years than ever before. But again, most of these conversations, if you know that it's a leftist talking point, you just know that that's like it's their heroin. It's less based on reality, and it's a lot more based on cultish religious ideology on progressivism.
Yeah, interesting.
Should somebody ever get a hold of these recordings, one, I will never have a career in politics. I will never. Oh my God.
Well, Kal, you know what? I consider you a friend, and I'm on that left side of things, right? But I do. I live on Vancouver Island. I'm considered a tree hugger by most.
But think about it. Most of the left for the longest time were the party and the individuals that, one, admired and were classical liberals, believing in liberal values the way it was initially put into the political space, like the founders of our country. And they were overly or proportionately concerned about the disadvantaged and the people that had what's the right word I'm looking for? The disenfranchised people in society. In that context, I wish there was more left-leaning people. I wish people were like, okay, I'm going to extract X amount of money in a capitalistic world, but I'm going to take a huge percentage of it and make sure that people don't fall too much behind. I mean, the whole premise of Jordan Peterson, he's like, one of his arguments is that the left is paying too little attention or too little appropriate attention to the disenfranchised.
Yeah, the suffering and disenfranchised.
He's like, in any society where capitalistic free market is going to be successful, there's going to be people that are less competent, and there's going to be people that are suffering, and there's going to be people that are not in the workforce because they don't have the looks, the skill, the charm, the education, the money, the way. All of these people deserve appropriate attention as a society collectively. So he's like, sadly, the defunding the police culture just brings more crime to Black America, which means more suffering. You're not doing what you actually are advocating that you're doing. So everyone gets kind of twisted in their hearts. Oh, I want to be good. I want to put some bottles in a recycling bin.
Yeah.
I don't really know where it goes once I put it in the bin, but I want to feel virtuous rather than like, no, let me go actually help people. So people like you that are on the left from an actual virtue standpoint and an ideological standpoint, I would love to hug more, but this is not the conversation. This is the conversation about how they are actually deviating from it, as in hurting more people, paying attention less to people that actually need our kindness and our resources.
Yeah. That's a really complicated topic, and I think there's an aspect to your advice that's correct. It's something that we can speculate on. It's something that we can offer our conjecture on.
Right.
But really, the expertise doesn't come from us, right? We have to have some sort of reliance on the people that are put in charge to handle this type of thing, right? And so,
it's sad that we have the systems that can have us live truly in a thriving society, and it's the corruption within the individuals that corrupt those systems. Meaning, okay, you look at a town, you get equal representation. The people that represent the people and their ideals, and they come in with their skills to allocate resources based on what a town wants, or a city wants, or a society wants, or a country wants. Like, conceptually, that should really work. Meaning, if you're in power, you're not in power because God gave you some powers. You're not in power because you come from a powerful family. You're in power because we put you there to work for us. That's what the government was meant to do.
Yeah. I don't know why this is sticking on climate change, because there's the potential for so much suffering, right? Down the road, there's a potential for it. I'm not, saying it's 100% just for the purpose of this conversation, but there are a couple holes. The biggest two holes that I see, if I count myself on that side. And by the way, I grew up in Alberta, which is like the tiny version of Canadian version of Texas. So I grew up as the entrepreneur kid. I grew up as the kid listening to Rush Limbaugh. I get it. JP's from Edmonton. It's just like he's almost a hometown. We used to joke he flushed twice to get to Edmonton, right? And so my point is that the two issues that I see with the climate community is there seems to be an ideological underpinning that we can make this right for everybody in the world, right? We have 8.9 billion people. Let's bring up countries like India, right? They didn't have the an industrial age. They didn't industrialize like America did, right? And so there's an aspect in academia and in our leftist egalitarian type of thing. It says, well, we should suffer now so that everybody else can come up to the level that we are at, right? Kind of like this woke idea that if you're white and you're male and you live in America, you got to kind of disavow your identity because you've been
I mean, but that's just a new justification for racism. But how do you go back to? I want to flesh out to what you're saying with regards to India. Like, what do you mean us suffering until? I mean, we have technology. We live in an interconnected world. I mean, we have the means to make the world an incredible place, but it's like, go speak to North Korea or go speak to the leadership in China. It's like, they're not really wanting to sit around singing Kumbaya. I mean,
no, let's do it this way. Okay. Cause I'll talk about, let's say that there's, if we want to limit the amount of output in terms of CO2, right?
We're not really convinced that that's a problem.
Okay, well, let's go on something that we'll do a lot of pretending for the sake of this point. So let's say, like, I mean,
but before you're saying, like, a lot of the climate change alarmists are based on assumptions that a lot of scientists don't necessarily agree with, or taken out of context. I mean, we're not running out of time. I'm willing to bet my life on it. Many timelines have already passed and nothing happened. I'm assuming AOC's 12 years of planet Earth is just going to go by just fine. Most probably Obama will buy another mansion 10 minutes before the time clock is supposed to complete, and it's going to be right in front of a beach front. And you're going to ask, well, if you really believe this shit, why are you buying your home in a mansion right on the beach? But point being, a lot of the assumptions are just completely wrong.
Okay. Which way should I take this?
It's kind of like, okay, you have an ocean. We know that there's a lot of things that we're putting into ocean that is literally hurting and abusing and devastating life in there. Okay, let's get busy using our resources.
Yeah.
And continuing to clean and not pollute and get creative about how we dispose of waste. And yes, that's where innovation should go toward. I mean, it certainly doesn't require any whining or pitchforks or traumatizing the next generation of children. You just get innovative. I mean, there's enough people with money that want to be innovative.
Yeah, I think there is an aspect of austerity that could come into that conversation, but we're not going to go there. I want to really hammer in on this point that I was trying to make, but it was a hard obstacle to get over because I didn't want to pull any remnants into the point. I want you to imagine the allocation of resources by country. Okay. So let's imagine a world where we said we had a finite amount of oil, right? And we wanted to allocate that oil to individual countries. And we wanted to do it in a fair and equitable way. If that were the case, China would get a disproportionate amount of oil and India would get a disproportionate amount of oil, or based on a per population sort of structure. Now, that's the only idea I wanted to throw your way and say, does that make sense?
But it totally makes sense. Here's the problem I would have with it. One, we have never, ever in the history of humanity seen the entire world be willing to be under one government.
Yes.
I mean, we just haven't seen it. And this is where a lot of people would say, well, the fact that we've never seen it doesn't mean that it can't be done. Yeah, true. You can also make a lot of really cool equations in your head mathematically. That doesn't mean you'll be able to pull it off. Yeah, theoretically is one thing. Just because we really live in a world that whenever people came to power virtually with virtue and good intent, I don't believe it was ever in good intent, but it was masked with good intent, you have corruption at the end of it.
Yeah.
Always.
Disastrous.
Like, I'm now going to murder 10 million people in the name of equity. It's like,
it was so funny because I was listening to somebody talk about Rousseau the other day, right? About, revolution for the people and all this kind of stuff, right? And I was like, do you not know how that ended? Like, I mean, I'm fine to have it.
It's always out of context.
Holy shit, like
always out of context.
It's like, Rousseau may not have been the Robespierre, but he came out of the woodwork only because of that out of control situation. It's just horrific, and it's I don't know.
I mean, what we have seen successfully is respect people's cultures, respect people's way. I mean, that's why I'm such a big fan of city states. You have the sovereignty where like people that are willing to fight for a particular land are coming from the families in that particular place that they're defending. They're not only defending land, but they're defending a way of life, which translates, if you take that idea to the end, it translates to their brothers and sisters and their parents, safety, security, integrity, and so on towards their culture.
There's a point that I wanted to build on with this like allocation of resources. And I think that's where I was trying to pull, or I was trying to reflect on the meta narrative for the climate change conversation. And it seems to have impregnated in it this idea of equality of resources, right?
Yeah, but you can't convince me that the same people that are now sitting on the human rights panel or committee or whatever you call them in the UN, who are slaughtering their own people, that I should not laugh at you when you even have a slight opinion about how to treat people right. It's like,
yeah.
So you literally want to tell me, oh yes, we're going to let Russia and China sit on the same panel, the same people that are completely disregarding their own citizens and slaughtering them, and the same people that are destroying our planet, yeah, they should have a say in what amount big corporations are going to give towards this entity in order to be granted rights to emit. Are you kidding me?
No, this is ridiculous. That's
not even a joke. It's like you would, again, if you're an alien landing on planet Earth and you hear that logic, you're like, what? How are they not just hung and killed and thrown out of the conversation? Like how?
Well, yeah, I want to bring this in later. It's like we've lost our resolve when it comes to North Korea. We've lost our resolve when it comes to say Russia or China. We just it's almost like we're losing a backbone, right? Because the separation of borders have become or the changing of borders have been something of the past. It's like this postmodern condition of like the borders never change, right? Or I don't know. So, this is really
it's going to come back. Like I heard this conversation many times from Douglas Murray, and he's written some great books. If you're not familiar with his stuff, but
he's great. Yeah,
the West, at some point, hopefully it's not too late when we decide to do so, will need to start taking pride in their culture in the same vein or in the same manner, to the same degree, if not more, than the cultures that are trying to annihilate us are willing to do with their culture. Meaning, you have the Islamic world who are like so committed to their ideology, willing to stand up for their ideology, regardless of what my opinion of it is right in this very moment. But the West is not willing to do that. We're not willing to take pride in equality. We're not willing to take pride in free speech and freedom to assemble, freedom of religion. Like, it's kind of like we're apologizing. We've got, not a lot of people, many people are not, but sadly, the woke culture is, not only are they now more explicit with trying to annihilate and to destroy entire Western civilization, but they will continue to succeed until we arrive at a point that people on the other side are willing to say, no, our values are values, and it's very clear, and we're not willing to give an inch. We're not willing to apologize for it because it's freed more people than any other ideology. It's given more opportunity to people in the world than any other. Now, if you want to come up with a better solution, please be our guests. If you want to modify it and make it better, please be our guests. But if you wanted to destroy it because you don't like how miserable of an existence you personally have, sorry, no.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. What I would want to point out is that you brought up somebody with Jordan Peterson. I did a Google search. Bjorn Lomborg is who he had on his show recently, and he was somebody that was really interesting because he prioritized our spending based off of the best results. And my wife and I, we've talked about we agree with that. Let's clean up our our world room first before we go, like let's feed people, let's get them running water, let's take care of malaria, let's help the rest of the world.
I want to share. I want to share something real quickly, just in case if somebody's listening to this. So, I use this analogy a lot in many different contexts of like, it's one thing talking about taking a shower. It's another thing telling your friend about taking a shower. It's another thing about reading about taking a shower. It's another thing about reading about somebody else taking a shower. You just won't get clean until you get in the shower, right?
Yes. Okay.
It's just, you can't escape that. So you can talk about doing good to the world. You can read about doing good in the world. You can watch shows about people doing good to the world. The other day, I went to join a church group, to clean up Griffith Park.
Yeah.
And it was so uncomfortable. I had a weird shirt and I couldn't be my handsome self. I was just like tatted up. I mean, I had like my mask on and gloves, and we went to clean. And then I kind of went off on my own, like in this little meditative state. And we had this little clippers to pick up trash. And as I picked up the trash, I felt like $1 million. I was like, I was swimming in this joy of being like completely, almost like invisible, irrelevant to the world, because someone can look at me and be like, oh, that's just another worker. And I went about picking up garbage and I felt so good. It was like that getting in the shower. It's like, imagine you haven't showered for 3 months and you're like chills. I was like there and like in this state of ecstasy picking up garbage, and had a few people smiling, and someone came up and recognized, oh, you're not really working with the park. And I'm like, that's true. And I'm like, yeah, I'm with this church and we're partnered up with the Rangers and we're cleaning up and we're going to be doing this a bit more. And he's like, well, here's a spot a few blocks from here that I go by, and I used to go pick up trash myself. And I thank you so much for what you're doing. And the point being is like, if these whiny pink hat delusional people would just go clean their neighborhood, go feed a homeless person, figure out how they can be kind to the people that are feeling disenfranchised. Oh my God. After you've done that, and you can pick up a flag or a sign and go march, you'll be like, you know what? My feet are exactly where my mouth is. And not only do I do stuff in my own community, in my own family, but now I'm wanting to take it a bit further. I want to go speak to these leaders and have them impact on a larger scale. Yeah. Oh my God. Even if I disagree with your mission, I would want to like give you a hug and see how it can add value to your life.
Yeah. Practice.
No one is saying is that what these people are doing are wrong, but like, there's so much more to do that are actually tangible and real.
Yeah, we have 8.9 billion people that can change the world literally like tomorrow if we all just did something. We all got into a shower, we all be clean. We might have no more water, but
well, you know, and I would say I would be curious to hear what you would say. And I think it's a worthwhile conversation that Jordan is now having almost with everybody. He's basically saying that the woke culture is gaining steam so fast because the opposition, which is now the opposition, the sane ones don't have a compelling narrative. So like, what would a compelling narrative look like? I think this is the question that everyone in the West should ask. What would be a more compelling, I mean, here's the thing. It's like when you're talking about reparation, you're talking about slavery. It's like, I see the 600,000 plus people that died in order to liberate slaves and abolish slavery. Sadly, someone looks at the same incident, they're like, but our founders had slaves. You're like, yes, so did everyone else in that era. It wasn't even like, you might want to trace back where the idea of abolishing slavery came from England and who was espousing it and what were their lives like and where did that thought continue. And when the founders were creating this constitution, they talked about the sin of slavery and they all would slowly, then you're like, well, but they had slaves. You're like, yes, we've had this conversation already. Everyone did. And so did white people. And there were not only black slaves in the Americas, there were also white slaves and there were Irish slaves and there was a bunch of black people that owned slaves. And it's not black and white, literally and figuratively, any of this conversation whatsoever. But just to get into the details of like, what made it better? What added freedom to this conversation?
You asked me what my narrative was, and it's like, my narrative on that, it's like, it's ridiculous. is that good enough narrative? And so I would pause, and that how I would qualify whether or not that's a good enough narrative, right? Because it's a truncated short narrative. It doesn't, what is it? It's just ridiculous, right? And
No, but
without
opposing it, what would be an attractive enough narrative that people on, oh my God.
Well, I have a better question but I have a better question for you on this, is that and this is really one that is kind of is speculative, is to say, what are the chances, and you've alluded to it already, that the gaining steam that Jordan Peterson alludes to, what are the chances, like the Labor Party in Nazi Germany, that this movement can galvanize to a point where we say, holy fuck, they're in power now?
Very easy. Very easy. The President of the United States is now a part of them. The President of the United States is currently being influenced. Well, first of all, I don't know if he has enough cells in his brains that he even knows his name, or that he even knows that he's president. But assuming the people that are putting the words in front of him that he is reading off of a teleprompter, which he's not even doing right, but assuming the people that are putting the words that seem to come out of his mouth, the extreme left has complete hold of him. And if we didn't have checks and balances to push back on it, they would completely destroy this country.
Okay, good point to state that. I want to move on to one more thing because we have 10 minutes, and yes. I want to take you back to that imagined state of bliss. It's almost like you entered a meditative state when you were picking up that garbage, that cleaning sort of, right? And so the meditation here, I'm trying to make this connection. Let me know if you think this is true, is that the meditative state that you do in your morning ritual where you're laying down, right? And eventually something washes over you. I remember last episode you were talking about helping a homeless person, and you've used this before. It can catch you sobbing, right? You can sob like a little boy, right? Like a young child, just like full of emotion, right? Mm-hmm. Overcome by this. So I want to talk and explore a little bit about that. It'll be kind of how we wrap up the exercise, is that this swelling of emotion. Could I assume that this is like the state to which you aspire to in that meditative, like if you've arrived as a humbled, crying, vulnerable entity or muddle on the floor, right? You've somehow really overcome the feeling of your own anxiety. You've really purged all of that for those moments. Would you describe that as the cleansing sort of like aha state?
Everything you just said sounds beautiful, but it sounds like a statement more than a question. Yes, that's where that arrives. Or are you asking what is the, like, is there a relationship, or what does a relationship look like in a meditative state versus like in an altruistic state, if you will, like the going beyond yourself? I think that's the state that human beings are just hungry for. I think most of what we do in our lives is to get that experience, and sometimes we are given a gift where it lands on us. And then people write religious books around it. People make commitments around it. People dedicate their lives to the betterment of the world from that state. But then it's something that I like relating to. Let's think about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous for a minute. There's a lot of people that come in kicking and screaming, not believing, not trusting, not feeling like they have a place in the world. They're suffering. They're miserable. They're disconnected from the world. There's so much irritation in their being, and they push themselves through the steps with a proper guide and a proper mentor, and they arrive at the other end completely awakened, or at least not suffering a lot less. Let's put it that way. Meaning They've handled their fear, they've handled their resentment, they've faced the people that they were terrified of. They prayed even they didn't believe, and all of a sudden they went into the state of inquiring into, and they went into the state of like gaining humility, asking for humility, gaining willingness, asking for willingness, not even knowing who they're asking from, but like just following directions. And they come out on the other end being like, wow, that was a profound experience. My life has been transformed forever. Yeah. And then there are people that arrived at the 12 steps, haven't had an awakening prior, and they've had this white light experience. And, you know, William James talks a lot about the variety of religious experiences. He's talked about different types of awakening. Some people literally are given it for good or for the bad. And they're like, have seen the state of liberation. And then they go, okay, now let me go through the 12 steps so I can deal with the 3D world, the people that I resented and the people that I've done harm. And let me go make my amends. And they come out on the other end integrated with that experience that they were freely given.
Yeah.
I had the freely given experience and then went through the 12 steps. Like for me as a human being, I would not have gone through the 12 steps if I haven't been given. Well, I don't know, but that's how it happened for me. I was touched by the divine. I had this transforming, gifted experience of moment of pain and suffering taken away, that I said, okay, I got to go change my life and I got to go do the work. So it's the same with like these meditations. Like sometimes I go into a meditation feeling completely miscombobulated with the world and feeling separate from the world and lonely and isolated and sad. And I go through the meditation, go through these guided meditations and come out on the other end being like, oh, this is what a feeling more liberated will feel like. This is what having more hope about the world and creating a better future and looking forward to my future would look like. But sometimes it's the other way around. So these feeding the homeless, cleaning making your bed, cleaning your community is kind of where you go feeling separated, and you go into this experience, all of a sudden something transforms you in the nature of going beyond self. Yeah. And every tradition has that, an element of service to come out on the other end.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess where I was leading with it is that the, to find that transcendent state that you're describing, it could be through the, the sobbing episode that you talk about. It could be just the service to community that you're talking about. So there's multiple pathways to a transcendent state, which it seems to me like once you've experienced it, you want to seek that out again.
Yeah.
Right? You want to.
The weird thing about that sobbing experience that I shared, I think if I wasn't able to relate to him, I wouldn't have cried about him.
Yeah.
I don't think it was an altruistic moment, meaning that wasn't an altruistic moment of like, I'm crying for the pain of the world. Right. I just could relate to him because I've been homeless before.
Oh, I can
relate to him. I can relate to it because like I can see how I could end up like that.
Yeah,
so it's the humanity and the relatability, not so much like, oh, I cry for the world. It was not a Mother Teresa moment. This was just more like, I think most people react to the world because of what's happening internally. It might be masked with a million different things, but the rejecting of the world, the pushing back at the world, the making wrong at the world is more a dynamic that one is engaged with oneself.
Well, I want to leave the episode with this. It has to do with homelessness, and it was a conundrum that I faced several years ago when I was living in downtown Vancouver. There's a lot of, probably like in every metropolis sort of city, there's lots of homeless people, and I had my sons with me, and it's the kind of thing that you have to step over somebody, and there's just a point where if they're a block over, I can understand that. But if I actually have to step over somebody, another human being who is suffering right in front of me, I had a real problem with that, Cal. I was like, how do I? And then I've got my two young ones in tow. How am I stepping over somebody to go get an ice cream cone? Or whatever we were on our way to go and do, right? You know what I mean? How do I do that?
It's something we can talk about for hours. Yeah.
Our society is such that there's this narrative in our society that says you're doing them more harm by giving them money or helping them or taking time out of your day than just allowing the system to handle it because there's places set up for these people. That's literally the answer. And I'm like,
it's such a complicated issue. I would recommend people that when you're giving to a homeless person, give the homeless person from a selfish place. Give them because it will make you a better person, regardless of what happens to them. Because we can solve their problem, but you can't solve your problem if you're the one acting. Meaning, he might deliberately want to take advantage of you. He might deliberately be irresponsible, or he might be mentally ill, or he might have been given opportunities a million times before and prefers the life that he's in. He might need God. He might need a doctor. He might just need money. What that person, the personality or the character of the homeless person is so complex. It's not just one thing. So give them because I have such a good life.
Yeah, don't try and rationalize it. Don't try and see what their motives are. Just say, exactly. I give this freely. I don't care how you're going to use it, quite honestly.
If I looked at somebody and I know he's about to go cop some drugs, I would not give him money.
Right.
But this person that came up to me asked me for lunch.
Right.
And that came to a moment of going like, I can buy lunch for me. Why wouldn't I buy lunch for him? Yeah. I'm given these incredible gifts from life. I don't know when it's going to end. But today I can buy him lunch. Damn right, it's my obligation and my responsibility to do so.
Yeah.
From that standpoint, not like I'm trying to be holy and just like, no one needs your holiness.
Yeah.
Right?
Kal, I think that's a perfect end to our episode because we're at the top of the hour. And for everybody out there, thanks for joining us again. This is my main man, Kal, and he's coming back again next week. Stay tuned, support us, and good things will happen.
Thank you very much, sir. We will talk soon. Have an amazing rest of your day and week.
Awesome. Bye.